What is a thing that isn't taken seriously, but it actually should? Story 1. The absolutely abysmal state of our software infrastructure. We've built up our civilization on unimaginably complex pieces of software with even more complex interactions between them, and the quality standard is just above it works for the vast majority of it. We are in for a very bad time if we don't get on this. CrowdStrike was an example, and not even a particularly far-reaching one. Story 2. Alcohol use. There are a lot of people white-knuckling life, depressed and anxious, that haven't put two and two together, that it's because of their habitual alcohol intake. It's insidious. They think the alcohol is helping with the stress and depression, but it's causing it. It just so happens that the anxiety and depression last much longer than the effects of the alcohol, like weeks. So it's incredibly easy to not make that link. Edit. Man, people are too literal on the internet. I'm not saying that anxiety and depression are solely caused by alcohol. That's a ridiculous assertion, especially because I'm a person who has chronic anxiety and depression via genetics. Alcohol makes those problems infinitely worse. And there's a lot of people who think they need to drink to deal with their anxiety and depression, when alcohol is the thing that is causing or exacerbating their anxiety and depression. Story 3. ADHD. It's not just about paying attention at school. It affects most tasks we do as humans, including social interactions, relationships, friendships, and more. Untreated ADHD carries increased risks of obesity, suicide, substance use, unplanned pregnancies, poverty, depression, anxiety, personality disorders, increased likelihood of experiencing trauma, car accidents, school problems, job problems, broken relationships, and much, much more. And it's by far the most treatable mental health condition we have. Story 4. We're running out of helium. It's a limited resource that pulled out of the ground when drilling for fossil fuels. It's created via radioactive decay and is a non-renewable resource. We're literally putting an impossible-to-replace resource into party balloons and effectively releasing into space. Many serious industrial, medical, and scientific endeavors require it, and there is no good alternative on Earth once it's gone. Story 5. Speaking as a climate scientist and professor at a university climate change, we learned quickly during COVID that even when nearly the entire world halted, a majority of travel.it barely made a blip on the emissions data. We are in serious trouble, and buying LED bulbs for your house won't fix it. I have a CO2 monitor I carry with me, and even outside it has been registering over 430 ppm. Story 6. As an Australian, the sun, and more specifically sunburn or tanning, if I'm not mistaken, we're #1 in the world for skin cancer cases, partially owing to our huge ozone hole. Far too many people get skin cancer and ignore it or don't get their skin checked that could catch it early. Story 7. The current trend of pretty much all influencers and content creators being sponsored by gambling companies. Gambling addiction is becoming a pandemic among youths, where it's starting to become a problem in schools, and it's all because it's so easily accessible and normalized by these people, whose target audience are mostly young. It doesn't help that esports and loot boxes are so ingrained in video games that are also featured as normal in their content. This is a disaster waiting to happen for this generation. Story 8. Lack of driver education and skill, prevalence of distracted drivers, etc. I've only been driving for 20 IRs, and in that time, the average competency of drivers on the road has gotten so much worse. Of course, in the U.S., we have minimal public transport outside of major cities, and workers have to keep working, so anyone with a pulse can get a driver's license. Story 9. Basic food safety. A lot of people fall prey to the logical fallacy of, well, I've done insert super unsafe thing here a bunch, and I've never gotten sick. What's the big deal? Failing to realize that it's not that a bad thing is super likely, so much that if it does happen, it can be catastrophic. I'm living proof. I went almost 3 decades of being cavalier about a lot of food safety things, and as the kids say, I fucked around and found out. One bad bout of food poisoning is all it took to cause digestive tract damage that I'll have to live with for the rest of my life, and it can be debilitating during even a moderate flare-up. Don't tempt fate, y'all. Cook your food to a safe temperature, keep things cold that need to be cold, wash your hands, and be careful about cross-contamination. You might be fine if you don't, or you might also end up regretting it the rest of your life. Story 10. Living alone. As a single person who is asexual, I'm mandated by Western society to live alone. But humans are social, and I crave a family atmosphere in the house. It's so lonely without others around just doing their mundane, cheerful life stuff. People strongly feel this is some sort of trap. I've been accused of being a closet gay, a predator, or just a weirdo. Is it that unusual to want a housemate or two as a grown woman? Isn't it much more unnatural to live alone, speaking to no one for days? I've lived independently for 11 years. I just want some company and someone to share my cooking with. I want to noodle about doing house stuff and have mundane conversations about the patio plants and live in domestic bliss. 8. Story 11. Simple PPE. Eye protection and hearing protection are so cheap. A former coworker was visiting a designer's office and accidentally left his safety glasses on. The designer was playing with a thing we called a filter, later determined to be a class action lawsuit. The metal his legs popped off while in the designer's hand and lodged itself in my coworker's safety glasses. Of course, the same applies to steel-toed footwear. Story 12. Getting high daily. Weed is seen by many as having no harms, but can be very psychologically addictive. Daily use causes anxiety, depression, a change in personality, worse sleep, and many other issues depending on your body. I really expect that once more studies are conducted about the effects of weed on the body, it won't be considered as harmless. Story 13. Finances. I know many people who don't take their finances seriously. They believe that as long as the bills are paid, they can spend the rest of their money frivolously. A big one is eating out for every damn meal every day. While that's their prerogative, they would greatly benefit from learning about saving and the financial freedom that comes with it. When emergencies occur, they're shit out of luck. Story 14. Plastic waste. I scrolled way down and didn't see it here. I really try to limit the amount of plastic that I use and discard, but even then, it's a lot. Sure, bring your reusable shopping bag to the grocery store, but what's that worth when absolutely everything is encased in mostly non-recyclable plastic, often for no identifiable reason? We are leaving a toxic time bomb for every generation that comes after us. Story 15. In USA, the long-term effects of recent Supreme Court decisions overturning Chevron and weakening the executive branch. Edit. In general, Dobbs has gotten a lot of attention because it kicked in immediately, but the major questions doctrine and overturning of Chevron will have a long-term effect on the federal government's ability to regulate corporate activity. Story 16. Making homes wheelchair-friendly. I work in accessibility consulting, and residential properties consistently perform the worst for accessibility and adaptability. With an aging population and more people with disabilities having better outcomes to live independently, this is one of the biggest issues that isn't being talked about. One of the problems is that developers might not know what accessibility is, or the standards they use are not adequate. Here in Canada, lending and financing programs for builders are using accessibility standards from 2012, and sometimes even from the 2000s. There's a 2023 version of the standards. Instead, they choose to use the one from 12 years ago. Think about how different the world was back then. As a result, there are brand new buildings slated for completion in 2024 or 2025 with no or inadequate accessibility provisions being made. The residential developer clients don't want to improve. Every recommendation I make gets pushback, with the reason being your suggestion surpasses what the 2012 standard says we need and is therefore unnecessary. So housing continues to be built with lack of wheelchair accessible or adaptable provisions. Remember, there's a difference between accessible and adaptable. Adaptable means easy to renovate if the need arises. With 1 in 4 Canadians self-identifying as having some sort of disability and an upcoming seniors population boom, this is going to bite us in the ass. For sure. Yet nobody seems to care. On a personal note, I'm a wheelchair user myself. I live in a place with subpar accessibility. I can't move because there are no new accessible housing available, and whatever I find is priced out for me. And if I apply for subsidized accessible housing, the waitlist is many years long. I know someone who's been waiting for over 10 years. Story 17. Diabetes. It is a terrible condition that, if not controlled, will impact many organs and pretty much cripple you. Many believe taking metformin or insulin will keep it under control while it helps. Diet and exercise are also part of the equation. Knowing your AIC, checking your glucose, knowing what triggers a major spike in glucose, etc., will make a difference and keep diabetes controlled. Story 18. Environmental problems. When there is no food to be purchased, the rest of our problems will seem minor. When the heat and humidity outdoors become lethal, and the grid fails from over-demand and poor investment in infrastructure, other problems will seem minor. When aquifers are poisoned or depleted to the point of being unusable, and you can't get water to flush the toilet, let alone drink, all the other shit out there will seem minor. I am not actually trying to minimize current issues and suffering, but when the tipping points are exceeded and shit gets real, we will be pining for the good old days when the kids aren't starving to death and grandma isn't dying of heat stroke or dehydration. Story 19. Mothballs. Everybody thinks it's something that Granny keeps in her closet and it does no harm and keeps the bugs away. The reality is if you read the label, they're designed to be used in airtight containers, and that's because as they degrade, they release a nerve gas. This can lead to anything from a headache to increased blood pressure to heart palpitations and conceivably cardiac arrest, especially in those predisposed. Story 20. I live in the mountains near Yosemite. After you live here a while, you take fire safety really fucking seriously. People not from the area think we are overreacting if we see someone flick a cigarette butt on the ground and blow up at them. It takes a spark to ignite dry grass and brush, and once it starts, if you had a hose in your hand, you would not be fast enough to put it out. Story 21. Wearing a helmet when skating biking. I fell on my roller skates a few years ago, and the impact dented a hard skating helmet. I'm sure that had I not been wearing it, the fall would have blinded me at the very least, hit the back of my head, where the occipital lobe is located. To this day, I get insane migraines that require medication to keep them in check. So often I see kids not wearing helmets when they really should be, and it makes me want to shake their parents and ask why they care so little for their child's safety. Story 22. How food is being made, processed, from what with what. Farming practices, monopolies, monocrops, chemicals, fertilizers. We have divorced ourselves from understanding the food systems, and it shows in our population health. USA. Kids need to be taught about growing food, the ecosystem, and soil maintenance. It's a huge issue, and I'm so glad I live in Germany now. It's not perfect, but I buy local without breaking my bank. Some people here do traditional farming methods and rotational crops. I cook with the seasons. The American way of having all foods all the time is a transport nightmare, and it's just a huge and dysfunctional system. But no one cares. They just want to post fit checks and their kids on trips to Mexico on Facebook and Instagram. Story 23. Free speech. In the West, at least, it is at best seen as a nice-to-have or even folly. Free speech is the only guarantee we have that society doesn't become a collection of bad, harmful, unchallengeable ideas. It is the only method we know of which guarantees that bad ideas are marginalized and good ideas prevail, leading to the continual renewal and improvement of our lives. It is society's immune system, and we're killing it in the name of protecting ourselves from hurt, insult, and bad ideas being spread. It's a slow letting of open, free civilization's lifeblood. Story 24. I've noticed that since starting my ADHD meds, I've actually enjoyed getting up earlier and going to bed earlier. I used to have so much trouble waking up at 7 a.m., but mainly because I wouldn't go to bed until 2 a.m. or later. I felt like I had too much to do and that sleeping was taking time away from me. Now, I'm not a huge fan of mornings, but I go to bed by midnight at the latest, and usually get up between 5:30 and 7 each morning, and I wake up feeling much better instead of being in a bit of a mental fog for an hour or two. Story 25. Bowel pain. Telling you as someone with Crohn's and a family history of bowel cancer, autoimmune disorders, never ever ignore consistent and/or unusual bowel pain. It doesn't discriminate by age. I got diagnosed with Crohn's at 16 years old, and someone I knew was diagnosed with bowel cancer younger than that. With bowel cancer becoming increasingly common amongst younger people, it's vital you watch out for any signs your body gives you. Story 26. Increasing mass surveillance. It is one of those things that seem like a minor annoyance until it is too late. The existence of the surveillance infrastructure and the laws around it makes a transition towards authoritarian forms of government much easier, and resistance against it much more difficult. We must not allow ourselves to be scared into accepting or demanding even more surveillance. Story 27. Controversial take, but aliens. Forget the little green men and the non-human intelligence part of the conversation. Why has the government gone to such great lengths to keep this a secret? They had a congressional hearing and still managed to brush the vast majority of the story under the rug, and I find that ultra-conk. The amount of time that a disturbing number of people go without ever leaving a city, whole entire lives lived out in just one teensy tiny little dot on a map. And if they do leave, it's generally to another city. Don't get me wrong, living in, traveling to cities can be great and has lots of benefits. But to spend months or even years, or God forbid your entire life in one is just, well, sad and horrific and seriously messed up, yet it's been so normalized in the last couple decades. Earning. Story 28. Drinking responsibly. I love a good beer or glass of wine, but I stopped drinking regularly and getting drunk whenever I did it a long time ago. In actual moderation, alcohol can have some health benefits, but if you're drinking to the point of getting drunk, that's the result of your liver failing to process the alcohol quickly enough. If you're hungover, That's a huge beating your body has taken from the alcohol and in some cases can potentially be a sign of mild to moderate liver damage if severe enough. If you're drinking very regularly, even if you don't think it to be the case, you're becoming dependent on it. If you're binge drinking, that's extremely dangerous and putting your body under massive stress that it hasn't adapted to. Getting absolutely trashed is taken so lightly and even sometimes actively encouraged, such as at university, that it's scary how nobody sees the far-reaching damage it can do to your mental and physical health. As someone who once struggled with alcoholism and can now enjoy a beer as a sometimes treat without becoming dependent, it's scary to notice how regularly people drink large amounts of alcohol and are completely unaware of how much harm they're putting themselves through. Alcoholism itself is also not taken seriously enough. At best, it's seen as an issue but not given the serious public health messaging it should have. At worst, it's laughed off by people as a joke about themselves. Here in the UK, it's one of the biggest causes, directly or indirectly, for preventable deaths. I believe one of the reasons alcohol abuse is not treated so seriously is because it's as old as civilization and so tied up in our culture. If alcohol were invented in the last 100 years, I'm convinced it would be treated like hard drugs. I'm not saying I think it should be restricted like that, but the messaging around it and warning of dangers of overconsumption should be a lot clearer. Story 29. Dog owners not looking up what dogs should eat and what not. I just don't get men's best friend, but nobody seems to care that not everything humans can eat is good for dogs. And I'm sick of telling people this because all they say is, but she is doing fine. I never heard about this, so I don't believe it. And then suddenly, the dog gets sick, and they don't know how it happened. This is more a rant, sorry. Story 30, your dog. And in all things about that dog, by which I mean what it is, how it was bred, health and temperament of parents, overall lineage, working lineage if relevant, how it was raised by the breeder, how you raise it, how you supervise people and dogs around it through its life, your attitude to its normal behavior, who and where you seek professional help, how much effort you put into your dog's welfare. And I don't just mean loving your dog or providing basic needs. All of these factors are currently missing in the UK's cultural understanding of dogs. And that is why we have a national crisis of dog overpopulation and dog bite incidents. Most dog bites are never reported or need medical treatment, but all are important and should not be ignored. Story 31. The size of vehicles, they're absolutely massive right now. Truck and SUV hood heights are becoming taller than pedestrians. The weight of these vehicles puts a heavier strain on both tires and roads. They're also making it much more difficult to park around. And all of this ever-increasing mass makes them absolute weapons in accidents. I know the new Hummer is an extreme example, but it's just as legal to buy as any other vehicle. It weighs just shy of 5 tons and it's 8 feet wide. Imagine being rear-ended at a stoplight by this thing in your 2007 Honda Fit.